Marty Klein. Welcome to Sexy Marriage Radio. This is a pleasure to be able to speak with you because I've been going through some of the courses you've offered, as well as seeing you across the blogosphere, podcast world, intrawebs. That you have a voice and a mission that I am so on board with, and it's such a great time to have a little bit to spend with you, man. So thanks for coming.
Thank you, Corey. It's a pleasure to be here.
And so you have this mission of just trying to help frame a conversation around sex better in a lot of different ways. It's kind of the way I think about it, right? That it goes beyond just an act, right? It's so much more. Right. And I think that to start our conversation, it seems kind of interesting to me is how do we, as people listening to this, how do we actually take what we think sex is and make it a better question into what it really is, as the way you frame it? Because it's not just an act, right? I mean, so much more going on.
Right. Well, as I say in my book, Sexual Intelligence, sex is not just a behavior, it's an idea. And so my work for the last 40 years has been to get people talking about and thinking about, so what are their ideas about sex? You know, when people come to me as a therapist wanting to enjoy sex more, they think it's about some special trick with their tongue or where do I put my finger or something like that.
Right.
And there's no lack of people all over the place giving you advice about what to do with your tongue, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what I want to do is I want to challenge people to think about, well, what are your ideas about sexuality? Because what your ideas are, that's going to determine where you put your finger, right? So,
absolutely.
So that's what I look at first is what are people conceptualizing as the role of sexuality in their lives? What do people think their bodies are there for? And how much of a sense of agency do people have to shape their own experience?
Perfect. And so what are some of the common conceptions people bring when they try to answer those questions? Because you and I, if we're in the trenches with people in therapy and coaching, we get front row seats into a lot of the way the world will orient towards these things. So what do you come across most?
We get front row seats for better or worse, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We have front row seats. And sometimes it's thrilling and sometimes it's heartbreaking and sometimes it's both in the same moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a sense of agency really, I think, is central to people's experience. If people feel that they have to do certain things with their bodies or that their bodies have to look a certain way or their body has to function in a certain way, that's really problematic or can be really problematic.
Mm-hmm.
It would be the equivalent of going into a restaurant and not feeling you can choose whatever you want from the menu, not feeling you can choose whatever table you're at, not choose which piece of silverware you use, right? And not choose how long you take to eat your meal, not choose whether or not you can get up in the middle of your meal and go to the bathroom, not choose if I can say to my companion, please pass the salt, because that's such a disruption.
How dare you? Exactly.
Right. You don't get a lot of people at dinner in a restaurant where someone says, please pass the salt. And the other person says, well, you pretty much ruined the mood right there.
Absolutely. Thanks for breaking my concentration.
Exactly. But with sex, we get that all the time. You know, somebody will say, my feet are really cold. Maybe I should put on socks. Or, it's too hot in here. Please open the window. Or, wait. We really should use lube after all. Or, ow, you're leading on my hair. Ow, ow, ow. Right. So none of those things needs to be a distraction. Contraception, that does not need to be a disruption. Right. All this stuff, we need to conceptualize it as part of sex, not a disruption of sex.
I love that because I think that's one of the bigger things I come across, and for sure with the audience over the years with Sexy Marriage Radio, is there's this idea that it should be one continuous fluid connection. all from start to finish, right?
Right.
That it's just nonstop. We're reading each other's mind. There's this mind meld, body meld. It's seamless. I I don't know how often that actually happens. It's in real life, if at
It
all.
rarely happens, and it's not necessary. It's not
Absolutely.
necessary. We don't expect that from any other activity. We don't expect that when we're parenting our kids. We don't expect that when we're playing softball or soccer. We don't expect that when we're at the gym. We don't expect that when we're going for a walk around the block. We don't
Hmm.
expect that from anything else. But there's this express train idea. There's this
Hmm.
idea that once you get on the train and look at each other and say, what do you think? How about it?
Hmm.
That it has to go without comment, without interruption, or without change of direction. It's really too bad. It does come down, it does come back to this question of agency. Is
Hmm.
sexuality um, an arena in which people can play and investigate and express themselves, or is sexuality something that they don't own themselves, and therefore there are rules that are set up that they didn't make that they have to
Hmm.
follow?
And so, where do you believe, or coming across, most of these rules come from?
Well, by now they're baked into every culture. I mean, every culture has ideas about sexuality, whether it's American culture or Western European culture, whether it's Asian culture. And there's lots of subcultures. There are religious subcultures. There are people of
Hmm.
faith. There are people who feel that Scripture, dictates what our bodies are supposed to be doing during sex. There are people
Hmm.
who feel like the way that people have sex in the movies or in pornography, that's the way they're supposed to have sex.
Right.
Uh, People read too many copies of Cosmopolitan magazine, and they're going to find themselves stuck in one way of thinking about sex.
Right.
And Corey, most of us, we develop our ideas about sexuality when we're in high school and college, if we go to college,
Hmm.
usually somewhere between 15 and 25. That's when people really develop their ideas about sexuality. Now, the thing is that between 15 and 25, we have a very special kind of a body. We have a very special kind of a body when we're that young. It's
Hmm.
usually healthy, it's flexible, it's conventionally attractive, it's youthful. The thing is, we don't have that body very long.
Right.
And so
Right.
if our model of sexuality depends on having that kind of a body, then when we get into our 30s and 40s and beyond,
Hmm.
then we're going to be in big trouble because we're not going to have the equipment that our ideas about sexuality are founded on. And so a lot of people come in when they're to my office when they're 36 years old saying, "Oh, I don't get erections first thing in the morning like I used to," or "Oh, I um, my vaginal lubrication, it's not as thick and rich like it used to be, or it takes me a
Hmm.
lot longer to have an orgasm," or whatever it is. And you know, my accountant doesn't like when I only see people one time, but the truth is that a lot of people, all they need is to be reassured. Oh, that's what happens to bodies between the age of
Right.
22 and the age of
Right.
42. Or
Right.
that's what happens to bodies between 42 and 62. So it's really important that we have an idea about sexuality that's independent of what our particular bodies look like or
Right.
how our particular bodies function.
Right. Yeah, this sounds like you get into the thought processes of it's the meanings we attach to it that we need to examine and create new ones
Sure,
because it's
sure.
a whole different aspect of what life and sex really is and can become when we look at it through that lens rather than it's just an act of what I do or don't do.
Yeah, and people instinctively, or some people instinctively do that with other parts of sex. I mean, the project of parenting when your kids are 10 is different than the project of parenting when your kids are 30. You still are
Right.
parenting, you still have a relationship with those people that are your children, but
Hmm.
most people, they think, well, as my kids get older, my parenting project evolves. And most people understand that if they drink alcohol, that drinking is different when you're 40 than it was when you were 20. And most people who like to, say, play sports or like to go to the gym, it's different when you're 40 or 50 than it is when you're 20. When you're 20, you can go play tennis without warming up. If you go play
Right.
tennis with or pickleball, if you play pickleball without warming up when
Yep.
you're 50,
Yep.
then 10 minutes into pickleball, you're going to pull a hamstring, right?
Yep.
So people mostly understand that with other activities, our ideas and therefore our behavior has to change over time. And the same exact thing is true about sexuality.
And that's so amazing to me to think we don't do the corollary comparison. And for whatever
Yeah.
reason, that thing, our sexuality becomes this whole holy grail almost of, oh no, it's the only thing that doesn't change. It's the North Star. It's the constant. Everything else I understand, but
Right.
no, that has to stay exactly as the illusion I've had and the fantasy I've had has dictated.
Right. That's the exceptionalism around sexuality.
Okay.
The exceptionalism. I was asked a few years ago, I was asked to write a journal article about sexual ethics. And I
Okay.
said, no, there are no sexual ethics. There's ethics. There's ethics. And you don't need
Mm-hmm.
special ethics for sexuality. It's the same set of moral principles with sexuality as it is with everything else.
Hmm.
Uh, be honest, pay attention, treat people the way you want to be treated, right?
Yep.
Ask
Yep.
questions.
Yep.
Uh, don't lie. And if you do lie and you get busted, admit it. So
Mm-hmm.
we don't need special rules for sexuality. If people feel special during sex, that's okay. Some people feel special on New Year's Eve. Some people feel special when they're watching the Super Bowl. Some people feel special when they're cuddling their grandchild.
Mm-hmm.
Fine. It's okay to feel special during sex. In fact, I think that's what a lot of people aspire to, is to
Mm-hmm.
feel special during sex. But we don't need special rules in order to accomplish that.
No, I love that kind of concept is so good just because how often even I'm sitting here thinking as you're talking, Marty, I'll do the same thing professionally, where all of a sudden start treating that aspect of their life different in the past, rather than wait, no, 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 hold on, how are you bringing all of your life? That's where we use the phrase on Sexy Marriage Radio. We use the phrase that's taken from Dr. Schnarch that how you do sex is how you do life, and how you do life is how
Mm-hmm.
you do sex. Those are always
Mm-hmm.
interchangeable.
Yeah, that's how it ought to be. I knew David very, very well, and we
Mm-hmm.
used to talk about this a lot. Seems that a lot of people think that they need to do sex differently than they do the rest of their lives. And to be fair, some people feel that they need to do parenting different than they need to do other things. Some people feel
Yeah.
that they need to do friendship different than they do other things. But at the end of the day, whatever ethical principles, whatever decision making principles, whatever ability to be present that we have in our lives, that's the basic package we're going to bring to sexuality. And if that doesn't work for sex, don't blame sex. I have patients. I look at them sometimes and I think it's people like you who give sex a bad name.
I love that because that leads to the question of what is it that makes it to where when we think all we're really trying to do is just create some incredible sexual encounter, am I focusing on the wrong thing? Because it's almost like I need to do
Yeah.
more global, right?
You know, real life does not have very many transcendent moments. I mean, real life does not have that many moments where you think to yourself, whoa, I'm going to remember this for the rest of my life. This is
Right.
amazing.
Right.
And I've been to Paris and I've seen the Eiffel Tower, right? And I've been to Niagara Falls and that's pretty amazing. You don't get Niagara Falls every single day. You don't get New Year's
Right.
Eve every single day. You don't get the
Right.
birth of your first child every single day. And to expect that sexuality is going to be one of those experiences over and over and over again, that's just not realistic.
Yeah.
That's just not realistic. And it would be helpful if people had more realistic ideas about what a good and nourishing and acceptable and reasonable sexual experience is. It would be
Yeah.
nice because then
Yeah.
people wouldn't feel like a failure nearly so often, right? And people wouldn't feel nervous about whether or not they're going to be able to create that the very next time.
Right.
So I don't know, Corey, if you do a lot of cooking, but if you do a lot of cooking, which I do, you know that you could be the best cook in the world, and periodically it just doesn't work, either because you got distracted and you let the
Right.
thing boil too long, or
Yep.
because the ingredients that you used weren't in the right proportion, or
Yep.
because you just weren't in the mood to keep stirring it and you said, it's fine.
It'll
For
work
whatever
out
the
just
reason,
fine. Yep.
if you do enough cooking, you know that not every meal is going to be spectacular. And that's okay. Very
That's
few
good.
people who cook, they cook a meal and it doesn't work out and they say, well, I guess I'm just no good at this and maybe I
Yeah.
should just stop cooking. Most
Yep.
people who cook don't say that. And it should
No.
be the same thing with sex. I mean, every once in a while, it's just not going to be the way you want it to be. In fact, more
Hmm.
than once in a while, because we're involving parts of our bodies, some of which we have no control over.
Right.
If I said to you right now, you should have an erection right now, or you should have an orgasm right now. You can't do that. You can't do
Right.
that. And there's no problem with that unless you feel like your ability to have an erection or to lubricate vaginally or to have an orgasm, unless you feel like your ability to do that on command means something about you. It
Right.
doesn't mean anything. It doesn't
Right.
mean anything about you as a person. But if you think it does, then every time you want to be sexual with somebody, you're going to be nervous. And
Hmm.
being nervous is not a good way to start having sex, right?
Yeah. It's already anxiety provoking enough with without all the meanings that happen surrounding it, just because it's an intimate, vulnerable thing. If we really look at it, I mean, it's the whole.
You know,
Because I go ahead.
people think foreplay is about getting the bodies ready. No, foreplay is actually not a word that I like to use because it implies the big play that comes after that, right? But
Okay.
when people talk about foreplay, what it's really about is getting the people tuned into, oh, I'm about to do something for 15 or 20 minutes or 7 hours in your case, or, whatever it is. I'm about to do something for 15 or 20 minutes with somebody who I have some affection for, hopefully, right? I'm about to do something and it's a special space and I get to leave the cares of my day or the cares of my week behind me, and so I'm going to take a few deep breaths and I'm going to check in and make sure that I'm not really worried about something. I'm going to let that go for now. And I'm going to remind myself about why I liked being with this person in the first place, even though
Hmm.
they annoyed the heck out of me yesterday. That's the real foreplay.
Hmm.
Then after that, yeah, it's nice to relax the bodies, get the bodies in tune with each other, and then you can do what you like. But foreplay needs to start where people are willing to put the cares of the day behind them. If you're not willing to do that, don't expect your genitalia to just jump to attention.
Yeah, and I would think that's a big issue with a lot of relationships of people listening, because we think, again, it should be a seamless transition from day to day into this, because at one point in our
Right.
relationship, perhaps it was, and now all of a
Sure,
sudden, deeper in, it's not. Yeah.
when you were 19, you have nothing better to do, right? When you're 19, you just lay around. People, when I talk to couples about making dates to have sex, and by the way, it's not a date to have sex, it's a date to be available for sex. It's a date
Perfect.
for, okay, I'm not going to plan to do anything on Saturday between 10 a.m. and noon. And you too, and if we're both in the mood, then we can have sex. It's not a
Yeah.
promise to have sex. It's a
Yeah.
promise to
That's a
be
good frame.
available. So when I suggest that to people, people say, "Oh, That's not romantic. That's not spontaneous. And I say, you're absolutely right. But when was the last time you did anything spontaneously? I mean, if I was to say to you, Corey, when we're done with our podcast today, let's go bowling. You'd say,
Right.
excuse me, I have other plans. Of
Right.
course you have. I have other plans. I know when our podcast today is going to be done. And 5 minutes after that, I have another thing I plan to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's go to the gym or do another podcast, it doesn't matter, right?
Mm-hmm.
So with sex, again, we're talking about this exceptionalism where people think, well, I don't do anything spontaneous in my life. But what sex should be like is we're sitting, I guess, we're sitting in the living room and reading a magazine, and we have all the time in the world ahead of us. And suddenly my partner looks at me and says, what do you say, Mabel? And I look at them and I say, well, Jose, I think you got a great idea here. Yeah, let's go do that. That's
Right.
not how modern life works. Nobody does anything like that. Nobody is ever sitting around and one person says, let's go bowling. That's not
Right.
how it works, right? You got to plan days in advance. Well, Wednesday night is my bowling night or whatever it is. So with sexuality, it's got, if you have any sort of a busy adult life, you got to plan for it. And
Right.
most grown-ups only have sex on the weekend. Most grown-ups are too busy during the week and too tired during the week. So
Right.
most grown-ups, especially with children, but most grown-ups, they're only having sex on the weekend, which is fine with me. Um, and so you want to plan that. You want to plan for when the kids won't be home, or you want to plan for when you'll have the energetic part of your day, whether it's the
Mm-hmm.
morning or the evening. You want to plan for when nobody is coming over, unless that's your thing. So I tell people, if you're a grown up, it's not like when you were 19, when you had all the
Right.
time in the world. It's
Right.
not like that. And so you need to make a plan to both be available. Not a plan to have sex, but to be available for sex.
Now, I'm going to shift gears just slightly because we're talking about the transitions that happen throughout our life as we age, as we evolve, and
Sure.
sometimes our ideals and our meanings don't keep up. But in some regards, what do you see anything different when we get into the latter stages? We're talking 50s, 60s, 70s with this
Of
whole
course.
dilemma of sex.
Of course. Of course. I mean, um, almost every, now you're way too young to know about these things, Corey, but when you get to be 60 years old or
Which, by the
70
way,
years
Marty,
old,
just so you know who you're talking to, that's just 7.5 years from me, away from me. I mean, so
well,
I'm
that
up
will go
there.
by in the wink of an eye. That will
Yes,
go
it
by in the
will.
wink of an eye.
Yep.
By the time you get to 60, practically everything changes. And, when I was young and watching my parents grow up or watching my parents get older, I would hear my mother say things like, oh, I used to like green peppers, but they don't like me anymore. And I used to think, what is that all about? Well, our ability to digest foods changes over time. Our
Yep.
ability to drink and go to work the next day, that changes over time. Sexuality changes as well. There are physical changes that most people can depend on.
Okay.
Obviously, most women are going to go through menopause, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, for most women, not all, but for most women, the texture of their vaginal lubrication is going to change. It's going to be less like honey and more like water. And so
Mm-hmm.
as women go through their 40s and 50s and 60s, the couples need to use more lube. And
Yep.
for heaven's sake, do not wait until somebody is in the middle of sex, until you're uncomfortable thinking, gee, maybe we should use lube. No, you
Right.
use lube every single time you want to put something inside a vagina. And people
Yep.
say, how much should I use? I say, well, think carefully about how much you think you need and then add 25%. That's how much you
Perfect.
need.
Perfect.
And if there's lube left over, then you use the right amount. If there's no lube
Okay.
left over when you're done having sex, you didn't use enough. So vaginal lubrication, it's typically slower to come,
Mm-hmm.
and the texture is different. Men's
Mm-hmm.
erections, it takes longer to get an erection. The erection may not be quite as firm at 60 as it was
Mm-hmm.
at 25. Um, here's something that a lot of people don't seem to grasp, and that is that when men get to be about 60, um, it's not that easy to ejaculate, even when you're really sexually excited, which is sort of ironic because most men spend their 20s trying to hold off orgasm, right? It's coming too
Mm-hmm.
fast. How do I slow it down? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's like a week and a half when you're about 38 years old, when it takes exactly the right amount. But then it starts getting more and more
Then it
difficult.
shifts.
And then by the time you're 60, you don't always have an orgasm every single time you have sex. Or if you do, it won't be inside your partner's body. It'll be with your own right hand or left hand, or their
Mm-hmm.
right hand or their.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't need to be a problem. But oh, some people, they turn it into such a big problem. If you
Yeah.
don't ejaculate inside me, it means you don't love me. It means you don't think I'm attractive. It means that you're not having a good time. Oh, this is a big problem. And um, I see so many people upset that their partner doesn't ejaculate inside of them. And they actually spend good money in therapy to see if they can fix this problem. It's not a
Mm-hmm.
problem. It's just the way human bodies work when you get to be 60 or 70.
Yeah. And so again, this comes back to just getting into the nuances of where you are particularly and challenging all the different attached meanings you've added or the ideal of what it's supposed to be or not, where that script, you can use insert word here, script, meaning, what,
Right,
whatever, right? Because they all fit.
right,
Okay.
right. And, you know, it bears repeating that for most women, the vagina is not the primary sexual organ. For
Right.
most women, they like something in there. Not every woman, right? Most women like
Mm-hmm.
something in there. But for most women, it's not the primary sexual organ. For most women, the clitoris is the primary sexual organ. And if you look at a typical woman's body, the clitoris and the vagina or the vaginal opening, they're about 14 miles apart from each other. So to expect that putting something in and out of the vagina is going to
Mm-hmm.
stimulate the clitoris, just not practical. Now, for
Right.
some women, they're fine about that. Other women, it's all about the clitoris. And some people just still haven't gotten that memo, I guess.
Yeah.
So my friend Lonnie Barback used to say that um, if the predominant way in America that people had sex was men rubbing their testicles against women's clitorises, women would be having orgasms all over the place, and men would say, "What's wrong with me?"
Yep. Yeah. This doesn't do it for me. What's the problem? Why is this not working? It should work easier than this, right?
Yeah,
That's so good.
and when I was being trained, I learned, like everybody, I learned the sexual parts of the body, the erogenous zones. That would
Yep.
be the
Yep.
mouth and the genitalia and the nipples and the anus, right? Now I'm a little bit older, and now, Corey, what are the sexual parts of the body? The hips, the knees, the elbows, the neck, every weight bearing joint. Those are
Yep.
the sexual parts of the body. And when people are in their 40s or 50s or 60s or 70s, um, what people are really focused on is, oh, that hurts when I do this. And if I do
Mm-hmm.
this too long, I'm going to pay
Mm-hmm.
for it the rest of the weekend. So people, we need to take that more seriously too. You need to
Absolutely.
warm up before you have sex. You need to stretch a little bit. If you're 55 years old, you need to stretch a little bit before you have sex. And people could do that together, and that could be like foreplay, right? You need to
Mm-hmm.
stretch a little bit before you have sex. And if you put your body in a certain position, let's say if you're involved in oral sex and it strains your neck, right? If you put your body in a certain position and it starts to hurt, even if your partner is really, really excited, change your position.
Mm-hmm.
And you shouldn't need a PhD to figure this out. But free advice, everybody. If you
Right.
put your body in a position and during sex and after a while you're really uncomfortable, and even if your partner is really, really excited, change your body position. And the worst thing that will happen is that they will cool off a little bit, and then they get the opportunity to get excited all over again. How
Right.
nice is that? How nice is that?
Right. Except for it flies right in the face of that script of this should be continuous non-stop and non-interrupted buildup when that's
Right,
just not what
right,
life is, not what sex is.
right, right. Sex is a local, not an express.
Another good phrase, man. You're dropping a whole bunch of them this call. I love it, dude. So, last thought I've got, just because this is something I think that also trips people up, is we get caught up in this idea of what do I want sex to be, and and what I don't want, right? And talk about a little bit about that, because I think those aren't the same thing in the way you think through things, right?
Right, right. As you just said, Corey, knowing what you don't want is not the same thing as knowing what you do want.
Right.
Imagine going into a restaurant and there's a menu in front of you, and the waiter says, "What would you like?" You say, "Well, I'll tell you this: I do not want veal parmesan." And the waiter says, "Okay, thank you. And what would you like?" You say, "And another thing, I'm not in the mood
Right.
for soup. It's too hot today for soup." Waiter says, "Okay, and Corey, what would you like?" You say, "Well, I'm so busy preventing things that I don't want. I don't really know." So sexually, it's
Mm-hmm.
not enough to know what you don't want. You got to know what you do want. And how do you find out what you want? Well, one way is to experiment. One way is to have your partner touch you in different ways, or touch yourself when you're either alone or with a partner, and to see, like nipples. Some people, they like having their nipples stimulated. Other people,
Mm-hmm.
they don't. Other people, they don't know. They don't know. A lot of men, for example, they actually don't know, do they like having their nipples stimulated? Well, one
Mm-hmm.
way to find out would be to touch yourself while you're listening to this podcast, right? Another way, another way would be to be with your partner and say, why don't you try touching me on my nipples two or three different ways? Let's see how I like it. Go slow, go slow. And
Yep.
I have no idea how this is going to work out. Let's give it a try.
Yep.
Now, some people feel like, oh, I'm 50 years old. It's not terribly dignified to investigate sexuality in that way. I think just the opposite. I think, isn't it great that you're finally at a place in your life where you're willing, and you have somebody in your life where you can
Right.
say to them, hey, how about if you touch me in a different way, and let's both discover, do I like it or not? Interesting. It would sort of be like, well, we haven't watched a lot of, we know we like the movies, but we've never really gotten into black and white movies. Let's watch a couple of black and white movies and see if we like them. And if we do, we'll watch more. And if we don't, we'll say, okay, we tried that and it doesn't work.
That's so good. Yeah, I think that, and again, just clarifying the distinction is so important, because the analogy you were using on, if I go into a restaurant, the immediate restaurant that came to my mind was the Cheesecake Factory, and the size of that menu would take so long
Huge.
to go through what I don't want. No wonder it's so hard sometimes to get into sex when I don't know what it is I want, because I'm spending all that time, as you say, keeping things at bay that I don't want. That's so, so good. Well, Marty, keep
And
going.
well, I was just going to say that, and I know that we're gonna stop in a moment. One way to think about what do I want is, what do I want the bodies to do? Where do I want your finger or whatever? But another way to think about it is, how do I want to feel during sex? Do I want to feel connected? Do I want to feel youthful and graceful? Do I want to
Mm-hmm.
feel like an adventurer? Do I want to feel like I'm all by myself? So that's another way to think about. So
Mm-hmm.
if I want to feel close to you, or if I want some emotional nourishment because it's been a difficult week, maybe I'm not going to want us to be hanging from the chandeliers tonight. On the
Right.
other hand, if I'm feeling energetic and I have a little bit of adventure in me, maybe I am going to propose something that's a little more energetic. Um, so, what do I want the bodies to do is only one way to think about sex and sexual choice and sexual decision making. Another
Mm-hmm.
is, how do I want to feel while we're doing this for the next 20 or 30 minutes?
That's so good. Well, Marty, how can, if people are just now learning about you, how can they find you to get more info and all the other stuff that you do?
Oh, well, as you know, I have a website, sexed.org, SEXED.org. tons of free information there,
Mm-hmm.
over 1,000 articles that I've written about various aspects of sexuality. And my
Mm-hmm.
social media people remind me, always mention your social media, always mention that you have a Twitter thing that's at Dr. Marty Klein, or always mention you have an Instagram thing, and that's
Right.
Dr. Marty Klein. Always mention you have YouTube's. I'm always dropping, little 5-minute
Yep.
videos. I might even excerpt this and put it up on YouTube. Corey Unos.
Perfect.
So I have a YouTube thing. So if you go to social media, you'll see me there. I should hold up one of my 7 books and say, "Oh, buy my books: Sexual
Yes.
Intelligence, my book about pornography, His Porn, Her Pain." Corey, I so much appreciate that question. I so much appreciate that you're doing Sexy Marriage Radio and providing such an important vehicle for people to get down to earth, reasonable information about sexuality. So thank you
Yeah.
for doing that.
Well, and thank you so much for joining me today, man.